Abraham is our next character, our next hero. Now, Hebrews 11 has a lot to say about Abraham. He is our father in the faith. He is the great Old Testament example of the life of faith. But there's three things I just want to pull from what Hebrews 11 tells us about Abraham that can help us understand what it is to live and to walk the life of faith. And the first one is that by faith Abraham obeyed. And the life of faith, if it's anything, is a life of obedience. Obey the call. You know, God called him out of one place, led him, brought him to the land of promise, although he didn't see the possession of that land even, did it? Because it says, by faith he lived in the land of promise. He could have been tempted to have gone and lived in one of the cities that was there. His nephew Lot gave into that temptation. And when we think of Sodom and Gomorrah today, we think, oh man, evil places, terrible places. But the scripture actually tells us that it was like Eden. You know, it was a beautiful place. It was you know, the very questionable people living there, but it was a beautiful place. It looked like paradise. It looked like heaven on earth. But Abraham resisted the urge and the pull of the best things that this world could have to offer. Why? Because he had seen a city. And you see, when you obey the call, as you walk the life of faith, the vision of what God is calling to you to becomes stronger and stronger, because the walk of faith is a walk marked by vision. And vision will keep you from the temptation to take a shortcut or to compromise or to say, well, this is nearly, you know, as good as what God has promised. I'll take this now. But Abraham resisted that. He lived his whole life in tents. He lived his whole life knowing that the land he was in, God had promised him, but he wasn't actually going to see that. It was going to be his descendants that saw that. And faith will keep you going. Faith will keep you fixed on the ultimate goal, not a temporary, not a short term, not a shortcut, but what God has ultimately got for you. And the third thing that Hebrews 11 tells us about Abraham and faith is it says that by faith he offered Isaac. And this is a really dramatic story, isn't it? This where God calls him to sacrifice his son. But what we're told in Hebrews that we're not told in the Old Testament is that Abraham believed that he would receive Isaac back. He believed that in the resurrection, he believed that God would give him back. And the writer to the Hebrews says, and he did. In a sense, he did. He saw. You see, Abraham, as the man who obeyed the call, as the man who lived consumed with a vision of what God had promised him, he didn't just have a worldview of this age. He had a resurrection worldview. He understood that in order for God to fulfill his promises, that there had to be a death and a resurrection. And he was able to see that even through that amazing and terrible challenge of God saying, lay down the life of your son. And so the life of faith is a life where we obey the call. It's a life where we live with a vision of what God has called us to. And it's a life that is shaped by a resurrection worldview.